Our next speaker tonight, James Harry. James is a cultural builder and visual storyteller whose work weaves ancestral memory with contemporary expression. His story tonight isn't just about what's being built, it's about what's being inherited, what's being reclaimed, and what's being reimagined. James Harry.
OCM. Thank you, everyone. Wow, large crowd. My name is James Harry. I share the name Hualactin with my father. I've also, at birth, I was given the name Nohkelos, which means good looking. No, but it means old wise one. When I was born, my dad was looking at me, and he says, oh, he didn't say anything. He was just thinking in his head. He's like, he looks really old. And my mom said out loud, he looks really old, doesn't he? So they went to my grandpa and they asked, well, he looks old, what would she call him? And he said, well, Nohkelos. In our culture, it means old wise one. So hard to live up to, but. So my story is, I guess when you're an artist, your life and your art aren't really separate. So this is every fiber of my being is ingrained in this story. And I guess just to kind of start off this story, I'll start from the beginning when I really made a fundamental change to being an artist full-time. And that was when I was door painting out, I think it was out in Surrey, and I was getting up at 5 o'clock every morning. And I was picking up my buddy, and we were driving there. I'd do this probably about for a year and a half, and I just kind of hit a dead end. There was one night I got really drunk. And it was, we have to get up at 5 a.m., so I was still feeling it. And I just went in, and I was just like, okay, I quit. I left, and I applied to Emily Carr. And that, ever since then, I haven't really looked back because, I was only 19 at the time, but I really had to make that choice and change for myself. So ever since then, I haven't really looked back, and it's just been kind of growing ever since. So I've spent about 4 years at Emily Carr, kind of developing the foundation of my artistic practice. And, I've had a lifetime learning under my dad, who's a full-time carver, full-time artist for his whole life. He's a really well-known Coast Salish carver from the Squamish Nation. I see we got Aaron Nelson Moody in the audience as well, who learned under him. He's taught many artists over the years on how to carve and learn from our culture. So I've been very lucky to have him as a mentor and a father to kind of put me in this place of this cultural resurgence. So I've really, ever since Emily Carr, I've been doing it full time. Getting into public art is where I really started. And every project it led to another. And I actually, for the first probably 5 or 6 projects, I didn't really take any commission from my work. It was very little at first so that I could put my work out there. But I always made sure to carry myself in every public work that I did, that I also carried my culture with me. So at every new piece that was created, we would do ceremony and we would bless it. So we would cut the ties. The artist would be, traditionally, when you create a work, the artist has cut their tie with the artwork so that they can go on and continue to create their next piece. So throughout the years, I've really been trying to incorporate this in a lot of these new monumental works that are being installed throughout the city. And it's all been this reclamation of our identity. Because, this is a picture from 100 years ago of the Squamish Nation being paraded around Vancouver. But if you look closely, you can see that a lot of them are wearing headdresses. And our people didn't wear headdresses. These are Prairie First Nations representation. And their representation of their culture at that point was Hollywood. So Hollywood was really what was creating our identity at the time. And we've had to do a lot of work at reclaiming our identity over the years. So what is Coast Salish? Coast Salish stems on the northern tip of Vancouver Island, goes all the way down to Columbia River. And this is a shared culture where we have a design language that's shared amongst many different nations and communities. And over the years, it's been really difficult because we've had artwork that has really dominated our scene. So even people from the Squamish Nation weren't necessarily creating artwork that was from their own territory. So what is the artwork from our territory? Well, these are the three symbols: the crescent, the circle, and the trigon. So it's very minimal in nature and has a very simplistic form, but it's really these three forms that are the foundation of what our identity is. So as I was working my way through Emily Carr, I really wanted to explore this more, and there wasn't a whole lot of people doing that. So as I was studying, I was also lucky to have a dad who understood the visual language very well, but you can see that you use these forms together to create these sort of arcs and forms, but it's all through negative space. So you're using negative space to show the energy and the positive forms. So as I was delving further into this, I used a lot of the techniques that I had been taught through my dad. And whatever the form was, it was always a form that I would research at that location. So if I was commissioned to create a work in a location in the Lower Mainland, I would do research on, so what was here before all of these buildings were here. So on the right-hand side, that's actually a LiDAR scan map of the elevation and the data that we input to make the ravine that building had been on top of. And the one on the left here is a seed, is representing of Coast Salish knowledge and reinterpretation in modern form. And there's really a sculptural energy and movement and fluidity in this minimalist form that I really wanted to explore through wood carving and sculpture. So every piece would start as a wood carving that I would model and study different forms and shapes that might work in relation to the site that I had been applying it to. And it would go through many different iterations before its final installation. But I like to show this as another pivotal moment for me where I have gone through many hardships throughout applying myself to the public sphere, public realm, where I feel like a lot of our culture is still being paved over. So this was an example of the St. Paul's Hospital where I had done a sculptural installation on a really sacred site called Squatch Eyes. And Squatch Eyes is a very ancient site, so I chose to tell the story of this area. And there's really deep stories of how it was a portal, how it led to other sites around Vancouver and Burnaby. But it was a project that wasn't selected. And to me, it felt that, again, our history was being paved over. And that's a story that continues to happen over and over and over again. But to that end, I continue. I strive to put more of our work out there and compete against other international artists for our own space in our own territory. But as I kind of grew further into this exploration of our art forms, I found that I was starting to kind of work more into architectural space where I was also in conversation with the architecture in a lot of ways. And as the works grew in size and form, they often felt a lot more architectural because in its minimalist state, it sort of had its own language that it was different than if it was just carved in your hand. And they became monumental to the point where they begin to start to be architecturally integrated. And that's where the story really starting its change for me, is that this is now an art form that is shaping the identity of our city, a city that historically hasn't treated our people very well. So for me, this is a resurgence of our identity. It's celebrating it in very powerful ways through light, form, sculptural knowledge. These seeds that I'm calling project the forms back onto the land where these forms came from in the first place. So each moment that we have to reclaim this space and identity shifts people's perspectives each time a little more. In conversation with the land, Inchikite, This is a 10,000-year-old story of the Great Flood, the bow and stern of our oceanic canoes, where it ties the ocean, the sky, and the mountains and the land together. And again, architecturally integrated works that celebrate a lot of these stories throughout our city. So I bring it to question when we're looking and understanding Coast Salish form and identity as the viewer. We're brought into this space to unlearn and relearn what this land means and where we're headed, because we're all part of this journey together. And that's through this form and monument where, in relation to the earth and land, how each and one of us has a responsibility to carry that knowledge forward. And maybe exciting opportunities to think about how these forms can be in relation to us as we move through this history. I just want to end this on this is a picture of my daughter, Hannah. I talked to my grandmother about 2 years ago, and I asked her, well, she actually had told me that Hannah is the 7th generation since European contact in our family. And I found that very powerful because it's a very important number in our culture. But it's a marker that we're entering into a new era where we're finally healing and becoming in part of the mainstream conversations of this land. So, Hoichka, raise my hands. Thank you.
Wow. I think it's fair to say that, James, the courage to quit your job was fortuitous for your community as well as the broader community as a whole.